Salt. Have you ever been in such dire straits that you would do just about anything to make some money? Some of you might, and some of you might not. Sadly, this situation presented itself to me recently. Last year, I was employed by a MNC, multinational company, and was offered a contract position that was sadly not renewed at the end of the term. Since this is /NoSleep and not /Tifu, I served my time there and with a decent KPI result, but shit happens. Fast forward a few months later, and I still haven't found a job. With a family to support, finances are fastly depleting. I keep my chin up in front of my family, but deep down, I was freaking out. Now, the beauty of growing up in Southeast Asia, Malaysia to be exact, is that you never get short of get-rich-quick schemes, mostly illegal and some supernatural. And since I would like to stay out of jail, I opted for the far riskier supernatural option. The scheme I opted for was selling salt to the departed. The legend states that the departed souls use the salt to stop the decomposition process, and for that, they will pay the salt peddler handsomely. I've heard this tale since I was a young child, growing up with a Nyonya grandmother, and she was always very clear to emphasize that the pantangs, or taboos, that were going with all of her scary tales. I remember her saying that salt peddlers would need to be at a graveyard at midnight and have enough salt, in packages, to last him until daybreak. A wide-brimmed hat to keep his face hidden, and finally, the fortitude to never look up. She stressed that the peddler must never look up, no matter what happens. The dead will give payment in the strangest of items in the graveyard, and when the peddler left the graveyard in the morning, the items would turn into money. Needless to say, she also made us, her grandchildren, to promise under the pain of death that we would never attempt any of the tales we heard from her. Back to our tale. I got to the graveyard a little ways out of the capital with my salt and wide-brimmed hat in tow. I found a clearing with a tall tree and proceeded to sit down and start prepping my salt. As luck would have it, there was a gentle breeze in the air coupled with the silence of the graveyard. Let's just say my fortitude was tested. Sitting under the tree with my head bowed, I thought to myself, if this is a myth, was it even true? Until suddenly I noticed the unmistakable smell of roadkill in the air. It was similar to something that maybe have died from a week ago, except much stronger. There was a rhythmic rustle of grass that sounded like it was heading towards me, and before I could react, a decomposing hand appeared in my line of sight. I can still recall vividly the image of the hand with its darkened skin and tatters and the exposed rotting flesh and bones shaking slightly. I placed a small amount of salt in the rotting hand, and a few seconds later, the same hand dropped some dried leaves in front of me. This went on the entire night, and the arrival of the hands were often preceded with slow, soft rustling in the grass. The smell of rotting flesh filled the air the entire night. For those of you who grew up in this region, I know we were told that we were supposed to smell the scent of jasmine flowers when the spirits are around. The payments ranged from dried leaves, insects, to even half-burnt hell money. Sitting there, with my head bowed, I could not wait for the arrival of daybreak, and just when I thought I would have no more customers for the night, I heard a sound that haunts me until today. It was a soft cooing gurgle that accompanied the rustle of the grass, and a very small hand appeared outstretched. Its skin was still very much intact with no exposed flesh. The hand was bloated, but otherwise it looked like the hand of a young child, no more than 2 years old. I placed a small packet of salt in its hands, and it dropped a pacifier in my lap. I was shocked and curious at the same time. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to look up, but I resisted the temptation. I stole quick glances with my peripheral vision, but the sky was still inky and dark. But I began to notice the soft chirping of birds in the distance, and the slow disappearance of the roadkill smell in the air. Having never done this up until this point, I took it as my cue to leave and gathered up my payment and placed it in a small pillowcase for safekeeping. Upon standing up, I still kept my head bowed and started to walk out of the graveyard. Taking my first step, I felt a sharp pull on my pants and looked down to notice I got tangled in some of the thorny weeds. I started to smile to myself because I thought I'd let my imagination get the better of me, and told myself to relax and just get to my car safely with my prize. As I kept walking out, I felt the temperature of the air suddenly drop, and something brushed my shoulder, and the sensation made me jump enough to actually make me look up for the first time since arriving in the graveyard. Upon looking, I saw no one, only row upon row of faded and chipped headstones lining the ground. I ran out as fast as my legs could carry me towards my car, and I drove home while periodically looking over my shoulder towards my back seat. I get home safely, and yes, I find the money in the pillowcase for me, but the nightmares only started. Now, every night when I go to bed, I hear the gentle scratching and rustling at my door, and the unmistakable smell of roadkill. No one else in my family seems to smell it or hears the thing, and when I wake up, I normally find a grain of two or salt outside the front of my bedroom door.